There is an idea that's doing the rounds that the reality that we see is not the ultimate reality, that this is some sort of a simulation, that this is some sort of a Matrix type scenario that we're in, just one big simulation. From a philosophical and a psychological point of view, it's probably not that extreme to look at things that way. I mean, the reality that we see is hugely filtered by our experiences and by our narratives, by the cultural reality tunnel that we have been given. That allows us to see the world in a certain way. You could argue that that's a kind of a matrix. It's a kind of simulated reality that we're carrying around. Money is a simulated reality. The notion of commerce, an economy, clothing labels, walls, they are kind of a simulation, but that's a facetious explanation, and it's everybody who uses that explanation knows perfectly well that's not what people are talking about. Somebody just asked the question, if it is a matrix and it is a simulation, how would we escape it? In the film The Matrix, it's really a story of escape initially, but when you actually, I only caught the tail end of it the other night randomly, and I caught the tail end of it had a very different meaning than the one I thought it had when I first watched it years ago. I think it's a decade ago. There's a sort of a reassimilation. Neo means new. He's not the end of the Matrix. Neo is a software program that reboots the Matrix. He doesn't end anything. There is no, it's not a particularly happy ending, the end of Matrix Revolutions. Not really. What you're looking at, it's very Gnostic. If you know your Gnostic perspective, what you're looking at is the very end of that film. Like the last few seconds is the Oracle, the sacred feminine, the yin, is communicating with her estranged yang component, the architect, the distant, all-seeing, all-knowing I who watches, who has built the Matrix, who's designed the Matrix, and is cold and indifferent. The cold, indifferent, distant daddy father, the yang, the architect, is communicating with the Oracle. And it's a very distant and broken relationship that they have. But it's not, the end is not, oh well, that's all finished and humanity's free now. It's, we did what was necessary, even though it was painful, to refresh and start again. And there's no escape. Now the Gnostics, the whole Gnostic cosmology is wild. It's really wild. And I'm down for most fringe interpretations of Christianity, because in the early days of Christianity, the very early days of Christianity, there was just so many different versions of it. You had fully practicing Jewish Christians, you had Christians who, to all intents and purposes, believed in an entirely, it was like an Egyptian, Greek style initiation cult. That's not conspiracy theory, that's a matter of historic fact. It's fascinating, like the history is fascinating. But the Gnostics were out there, man. And I'm like, wow, if you wanted to get in trouble for being a heretic, you'd go Gnostic. Now, when we say Gnostic, we're talking about several schools and several different disciplines over several different periods of time. The recurrent idea of gnosis. Gnosis is the same as the word nous. It comes from the same root as the word nous, which is to know. And the idea is that you could only escape this reality through knowing, right? That was the promise of the Gnostics. However, Most of my videos are quite uplifting. This one is not that uplifting because I don't think the Gnostics really thought that you could escape. Not really. Not really. I think that they thought that if you could understand the true situation that you were in, you could make your peace with it. So you could escape certain elements of suffering, certain elements of fighting with the reality. But that's it. There wasn't like, oh, you pop the red pill and out you go. Except to the extent that in that story, enlightenment is awful. Enlightenment is awful in the Matrix, isn't it? He's a good-looking, late 20s, early 30s, healthy, intelligent. He's got a boring job, but we've all done boring jobs. I mean, sometimes that's just when you're young, you have to do shit jobs. He's got his whole life ahead of him. And it's dull, but it is what it is. And then he meets the master. I can't remember who the master was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be Larry Fishburne, and it's not supposed to be Keanu Reeves. It's supposed to be Will Smith. And the master, Will Smith, is Neo. And the master, I want to say George Carlin, but that can't be right. Maybe it was. Maybe they did consider him. Don't quote me on that. But just think how that would have changed the whole dynamic of the thing. But anyway, the master comes and offers initiation. And it's horrendous. He puts Neo into hell. Waking up to the reality in the Matrix is hell. He's a good-looking guy, intelligent, single, but, plenty of opportunities. He's got his life ahead of him. And he wakes up inside of this nightmarish hellscape inside of a pod. And his entire life is not just a fabrication, but a fabrication to keep him asleep whilst a machine feeds on him. Some foreign entity is just bleeding his energy whilst he lives a dream that's a nightmare that he's trapped inside of. It's a dull, repetitive nightmare, but the real reality is a horrific, horrendous, traumatic hellscape that he wakes up into. So that's like the Gnostics, because their cosmology of what this world is that it is hell, essentially. That it's an artificial half-world that lives in a half-light created by the demiurge, this mutant mistake that was born of pride and ignorance, who took power and then became sort of we could see our Satan, Lucifer mythology coming from the Gnostic ideas, because he then had people around him who were his cohorts, his clan, and they're called the Archons, the Lords. And in certain Gnostic schools, they're represented by the different planets, and each planet is a different Archon, and it's a different deadly sin. So you will have pride, you'll have deception, you'll have sadism, through these different planets or different archons. Not all the Gnostic systems believe that. But basically a bunch of bad dudes run by a bad dude who are here in this world, which is not the real world. This is a half world, to trap light. To trap light. And that's what we are. We are in the wrong place. We're not supposed to be here. We're in the wrong place. We're light that is trapped as a byproduct of a battle between good and evil. It's heavy, man. Could you imagine being out in the field somewhere and somebody giving you a bunch of mushrooms and laying this one down on you? Do you really want to be initiated? Yeah, man, I'm down for initiation. Are you sure? Are you really sure you want to be initiated? Yeah, let's do it, let's go. And then you come back, you like wake up the next day like, what the fuck just happened? It's a horrifying view. But we can see why, from a psychological, scientific point of view, we can see why humans would create a narrative like that. So it's not that far away from Buddhism, where you start with a central tenet, a central idea, a primary idea. And what's the primary idea? Well, in Buddhism, the first noble truth is all life is suffering. all life is suffering. The Gnostic central tenet would be, shit's pretty fucked up. This world is fucked up. It doesn't make sense. You have to have a schizophrenic relationship with God. You have to create a fetishist split inside of your own mind to believe there is a God who is omnipresent and omnipotent and good. And then there is all this evil in his world, in his domain. Modern Christianity plays games with this and says, well, God moves in mysterious ways. And I say, stop gaslighting me, bro. I know when people are talking nonsense. Don't double speak me. That's not it. That's not an answer. That's a non-answer. That's a politician's excuse. God moves in mysterious ways. And then there's different, in the modern world, there's different sects. And then there's people who say, oh no, it's the devil. It's the devil's work. So, well, why, if God is all powerful, does he not just summon the devil home and squish him? There you go, no more devil. Doesn't quite make sense. So you can see why we would generate this narrative, or narratives like it. There were multiple narratives like it. But it's extremely heretical. It means that, and they believe, well, some sects of the Gnostics believe, that the Abrahamic God that is worshipped by the major Abrahamic religions is the wrong God. They believe that's the demiurge. That's Yaldabaoth, I think his name is, Yaldabaoth. This mistake who was born of ignorance, impulse, and pride. From a lack of wisdom, from a lack of reason, he was born, and he's just wreaking havoc, and nobody can stop him. In this cosmology, we exist in hell geographically. When I say geographically, to use not Islamic or Jewish cosmology, but Christian cosmology, we would have heaven, where there is God and the angels and the good people, earth, and then hell, right? That's the geography of it. For the Gnostics, earth is a place that is below water. There is like, in the place above, I can't remember whether it's described as an ocean, but it's water. There's like light on that water. And then the real world of the true God is above there. And that's not an imperfect world. That's a world that makes sense. So if you copy the geography down, this is hell. As was the line given in Dr. Faustus, when Dr. Faustus eventually summons Mephistopheles, this powerful demon, and he's in his full narcissistic elation, and he's like, oh, look at what I can do. I can summon demons. I've brought you here from hell. Ha ha ha. You will do my bidding. And basically throws it in his face and says, I brought you here. I brought you from hell here. Look at me. I'm Faustus. And Mephistopheles looks at him and says, why, this is hell, and nor am I out of it. Which makes Faustus go, sorry? Say what now? That this is hell, that this earth is hell, that this earth is a place of endless desire that is unsatiated, endless lust that is never gratified, endless striving and struggling to get things that nobody ever really gets. That's the hell state that this world would represent. And the Gnostics promise, well, if you know enough, you kind of get out of it. But I don't think there is an out of it. So this could be a primitive form of simulation theory. You may have heard the very clever people, the scientists say, it took me about 2 days to get my head around it, but I actually managed to follow the logic of it. I'm not in the headspace that follows the logic of this idea right now. I'm just being honest with you, but I've been in the headspace of it. And the idea is that over a long enough timeline, humanity, human civilization, inevitably would, along a long enough timeline of human growth, development, and technology, that we would create a simulation. So therefore, mathematically, the longer the future extends out before us, the more likely it is that we are currently living in a simulation. Yeah, 2 days it took me to get my head around that. But I eventually got there, and it did not make me feel very happy. I was like, what the hell? So the question people have asked is, what do you do about that? I've been with this, holding this one for a little while. Been on my mind for about 6 months to a year as I look around. I'm like, tell the truth. What do you really think of this reality? What do you really think? And I think, I'm down with the Taoists, down with the Buddhists, down with the Gnostics. I'm down with what they're saying. Yeah, it is hellish. It is hellish. I was asked in Prague, and I was having a conversation with Pierre. We were talking about that, and he said, "Well, what would you do if you really thought that this was some sort of a hellish dimension where people were coming to suffer?" And I was like, I think if that was what my final conclusion was, and I really, really believed that, I think I'd just sit. I think I'd just sit by the river Styx, in Hades. If somebody came by and they were struggling, I'd help them. But I wouldn't do much. I'd be like a monk, basically. I'd just denounce everything and just not do very much, because what's the point? You can see how these stories, these ideas, depending on where you're coming at them from and how much of a narrative you have, if they're taken through to a logical conclusion, certain things start to make an awful lot more sense. I can see now why people would denounce the material world. I can see now why you would just say, nope, I'm just going to sit here. Why? Why not? Why not? There is nothing out there. There is not. That's all illusion. That's just all illusion, stacked on illusion, stacked on illusion. I watched Vice the other night. It's an okay movie. Kristen Bell does a good job of playing Dick Cheney. And they're talking about situations in Dick Cheney's life that's like a teacup on a saucer, on a teacup, on a saucer, on a teacup, on a saucer, and it's in very, very moderate balance. When you look at people like that, the people who strive to be in positions of power, the people who strive, the narcissistic psychopaths who seem to not care how much pain and suffering and chaos they leave in their wake, as long as they get what they want, whichever side of the political spectrum they're on, because they're on both sides. Let's not get it twisted. This ain't left versus right. This is humans versus reptiles. And you can see how tenuous everything is. How very tenuous everything is. How very easily those towers can be brought down that you've built. How very easily they just crumble. They want to fall because it's stressful for them to be upright. So they want to fall. But we fight to hold them up. Why? For what? I think the idea that this is a simulation, I think it's going to need a very, very serious review. The idea of looking at what this reality is essential. So whether you're on this channel because you were the victim of narcissistic abuse, or whether you're on this channel because you like the stuff I say about conspiracy theories, or whether you're here because of various mental health issues, PTSD, CPTSR, childhood trauma, everybody has to answer the question if they want to live a halfway decent life, which is, what is reality? What is the point? Why am I here? And what is a good way to live? So when we're considering these questions, don't get lost. Don't get lost along the way. You have to come out of it with an answer. Don't walk away. Don't permit yourself the indulgence of walking away without coming out with an answer, which is, how should I live? And I'm not here to tell you how to live. No interest in being a guru. If I wanted to be a priest, I could have signed up years ago. I don't fucking know. I don't know. But I am dead certain that you must answer that question for yourself. You must. You have to know why you're doing it. Because if you don't, everything else that you construct is a teacup on a saucer, on a teacup, on a saucer, on a teacup, on a saucer. and it will fall. It has to. It has to. Whether you're seeking to resolve anxiety, depression, anger management issues, or whatever the hell it is, you have to answer the question, why do I live and what is this reality? Is it possible that we're inside of a simulation? If it is, what does it mean? Because like we had this video debate a couple of weeks ago, which was good fun, and it generated a little bit of controversy and people got real frustrated with me in the comments. For example, the statement, oh, reality is an illusion. Reality is a simulation. Therefore, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want. Good luck with that, because you are in this simulation. So if we say reality is a game, where we wake up tomorrow, we're all in Call of Duty. We're all playing inside of a computer game. But in this computer game, you can suffer a lot of pain if you play it the wrong way or if you break the rules. It doesn't mean you're in a consequence-free environment. Far from it. Far from it. You'd probably be more free if you weren't inside of a simulation. If you're in a simulation, it's a closed loop. There are strict rules. Maybe the name of the game is to figure out what those rules are. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers.